सदाकते इस्लाम कुछ भी हो जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beacon of Truth Live. We join you exclusively online and look forward to hearing from you throughout the show. Now, in last week's program, we addressed the topic of Chanda, Zakat and financial sacrifice in Islam, proving that Chanda is not an innovation by any means and is actually very Islamic. Of course, supported by the Quran and the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In today's program, we will continue the discussion on Chanda and answer some questions which you have sent in. We will also begin talking about questions concerning the Nizam-e-Jama'at, or the organization of the Jamaat, its importance, and why obedience is such an integral part of Islam, so on and so forth. Of course, as always, we want to hear from you. Send in any questions and comments which you have. Tweet at us, send an email or message us. The descriptions of these contact details will be on the screen. Now, to help our discussion today, we have two students of Jamia Ahmadiyya UK, Samar Sheikh Sahib and Mustafa Siddiqui. So, Jazakallah for both of them for joining us. And I'm going to come over to Samar first. Assalamu alaikum, Samar.
Wa alaikum assalam. Jazakallah for having me.
Jazakallah. So, Samar, look, we're going to continue this discussion about Chanda and different questions which we've received about Chanda following our last show. And one question which we've received is that basically, just to cut it down in a nutshell, is Islamically speaking, is Chanda binding and can someone force someone to pay Chanda?
Okay. In order to answer this question, let's look at it from a broad perspective, right? All religions seem to promote giving alms or other charitable spending in one way or another. In some religions, it is done by collecting a certain amount of contribution. In others, it is left to the free will of the individual as to how and how much to spend. In Islam, we find both an institutionalized mode as well as a non-institutionalized mode of spending. Now, when the Promised Messiah Islam came and saw so much wealth being spent to attack Islam from every corner, he told the Jamaat that financial sacrifices should be made. And if one wishes to have a true relationship, he should make a covenant with God to frequently pay a certain amount. And also he said that if someone eats 4 loaves of bread, then he should spare one for the Jamaat and make it a habit to contribute in this way. Just as oceans are formed from drops, a small contribution ultimately will lead to a better means of propagation. And it is not just our Jamaat which introduced Chanda. It was also collected at times in needs of the days of the past prophets also. And so certain Chandas were established and made mandatory at the time of the Prophet Islam, such as Chanda Am and Chanda Wasiyat. And even Hadith tells us that Man anfaqa nafaqatan fi sabilillah kutiba lahu sab'u miyatin di'fin, that he who spends in the cause of Allah has his reward 700 times. So if there is a financial contribution helping to contribute towards the propagation of Islam, and you want to achieve the highest state of Islam, then you have to spend from what you love and what is dear to you. And we pledge to do it as well. So if we pledge to do it, then we are also answerable to God. If someone pledges towards a mission, for instance, let's say a soldier, and he becomes part of an army, he pledges to sacrifice and fight for his country. Can he be part of the army if he says that I am a soldier but I will not fight? Will he be tolerated, or if he is not active? So similarly, as Ahmadis, we belong to a divine Jamaat, and when somebody does bet and it sells his entire being, he should be prepared to sacrifice, to give sacrifice, because he promised to give precedence over religion he promised to give precedence in religion over worldly affairs. Yet when the need arises, some maintain a tight grip on their pockets. In this manner, can any religious objective be achieved with such love of the world? Being obliged and being forced are two different things. We have accepted the promised Messiah al-Islam, so it should be binding upon us that whether or not someone tells us or not that you must pay a certain amount, we should make it compulsory upon ourselves to pay the Chanda, because you naturally want to do it. What is the reason that we're in the Jamaat? We're in the Jamaat to attain Allah. So who can attain Allah without attaining, who can attain righteousness without attaining Allah? Because this is the form of jihad in this age, to make financial sacrifices for the sake of the Jamaat. Just as the promised Messiah Islam has said that the revival of Islam requires a sacrifice from us. What is that sacrifice? It is to die striving in this path.
Right, Jazakallah for that, Sama. Very nicely encapsulated there. The Jamaat doesn't force anyone to pay Chanda. It's not an authoritarian organization at all. But like you said, there's an obligation there as Ahmadi Muslims to contribute towards Chanda. And this is supported from the Holy Quran. The Quran doesn't just talk about zakat. Zakat is very important, of course, but it talks about other financial contributions. In fact, like we said in our last program, there's so many verses, and we quoted these verses from the Holy Quran, that say that you cannot, for example, achieve righteousness until you spend out of that which you love. In another place in the Holy Quran, Allah says that believers are those who establish prayer, and then He says, and from what we have provided them, they spend. In the Holy Quran, wherever believing has come, mostly along with that, good actions Allah talks about. So, amanu, that they believed, wa amilu salihat, and they did good works. So just mere belief or profession of belief or acceptance of Islam, Ahmadiyyat, isn't enough, because Islam promotes its adherents to actively participate within its teachings. And that's worship, right? And that's what our beloved Imam, Hazrat Khalifa Masih al-Khamis, Ayyadullah bin Nasir Aziz, has been telling us continuously that, yes, worship is offering our 5 daily prayers, fasting during the month of Ramadan, so on and so forth. But spending in the way of Allah, spending to help relieve the suffering in the world, is also a form of worship. And like Samir was just alluding to now, it helps us climb the spiritual ladder towards attaining righteousness, towards attaining the recognition and closeness of Allah. Now, we're going to move towards another question which we have received, and I'd like to bring in Mustafa here. Assalamu alaikum, Mustafa.
Walaikum assalam, Abdullah, how are you?
Very well, Jazakallah, Mustafa. So the question which we've received is that, is it allowed, or should it be, that someone is forced to pay Chanda if they are poor or in tight means? And the question was alluding around Tehreek Jadid, so the non-obligatory Chandas. If someone is poor and they are of tight means, do they have to, can they be forced to pay Chanda? It's kind of just, linking in from the previous question as well.
Absolutely. Well, Fatih Sahib, it's important to remember that the majority of Chandas aren't even compulsory. The few that are, this entire problem emerges when you imagine Chanda to be like tax collection. But the thing is, Chanda isn't a tax. Chanda is a charitable donation. And you can only pay as much as you can. And it's important to remember that every single Ahmadi has recourse to Khalifat al-Masih. And if somebody genuinely feels that they don't have the capacity to pay, then they're welcome to present their case to Khalifat al-Masih. And Khalifat al-Masih, being the supreme leader of the community, has the executive authority to reduce or completely get rid of that person's requirement to pay, or his obligation to pay Chanda. No one's ever been forced to pay Chanda. The charitable donations, as Samir mentioned, is an obligation, but it's not an enforced tax, and there is a key difference there.
Very to the point there, very important to remember, it's not like a tax collection. It's not forced either. Yes, there's the obligation to pay as well. And like Mustafa said, that if someone does have a situation, they are, they can write to Hazrat Khalifat Masih and have their situation assessed. And of course, that can happen. But, more importantly, the Jamaat also, isn't there to just take money, right? This is a blessing which Ahmadis actually have professed, and they've, even Ahmadis have sent their comments into us, and which I'll read out inshallah in a bit, where they've said that they really enjoy paying Chanda and they see the blessings from it. And in fact, the Jamaat takes care of those members within the community, not just outside the community, but also those members within the community who are of meager means. So for example, there's all sorts of schemes. There's Darul Yatama, where the orphans are helped. There's Maryam Fund, where those girls who don't have the means to get married and are helped as well, so they can get married. There's education funds where the Jamaat ensures that every single Ahmadi gets a proper education. And so these are all there, to help the community members, and Ahmadis do partake of these and benefit from them. And another point to remember is that in terms of the voluntary chandas, like the Tahreek Jadid, our beloved Imam, Hazrat Khalifat Masih al-Khamis, Ayyadullah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz, mentions all these amazing incidences, faith-inspiring incidences from the underdeveloped world, the developing world, and even the developed world, where people are of strict means. They don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot to give. And the local missionary there or the local office bearer recognizes this and sees that, they don't have that money, or they can't contribute. It's difficult for them to contribute. Yet, those Ahmadi Muslims themselves say that, no, we want to contribute, even if it's just the little which we have. And sometimes, it's just a few eggs or some produce or just a few pounds or dollars. But that passion to be part of the sacrifice is there, and to partake of those blessings. And so many incidents are narrated by our beloved Hazur, and this is throughout the history of not just Islam Ahmadiyya, but Islam. Even with the Sahaba, they used to really, really always want to partake in jihad or the financial sacrifices of which the Holy Prophet ﷺ used to urge them towards. And in fact, the Quran talks about those Sahaba of the Holy Prophet ﷺ whose eyes used to well up with tears because they didn't have the means to participate in jihad. So, this is very, very important to remember as well. I'm going to bring in now Samar, who is with us as well. Samar, just another question in which we've received, continuing this discussion on Chanda, is why there is a push for Chanda. Calls are made for members of the community to fulfill their pledges, and what about other needs rather?
I think the answer lies within the question itself, that why are constant calls made to fulfill Jannah promises? What wrong would be there if there are calls that remind us that promises should be kept, which is exactly according to the Holy Quran, which says that awfu bil uqud, to fulfill your obligations due to God. Now, these are promises that are covenant and should be fulfilled. And if it is not fulfilled, then it is a breach of trust. Just like if you break your pledge with a minor official, how you feel scared to face him. Similarly, how would you face the omnipotent God? And also, the focus on Chanda is also in accordance with the Quran, because the Quran has taught us that these financial sacrifices purify people and cleanse their hearts. And as a result of it, a believer attains greater taqwa and the society is reformed. So hence, this is why we remind each other and elect such office bearers to push each other and fulfill our promises. And Hazuri Aqdas has also consistently reminded the Jamaat and office bearers to look after the other needs and other needs of the people as well. Like today, we're going through this pandemic, and the Jamaat is there helping and providing all the equipment and needs. And this has always been the case. Just look at the hadith where when a person came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and asked him to be sent on jihad, but Hazur ﷺ told him that your jihad is with your parents, that is to look after them, to take care of them. And yes, Allah is there for the support of the Jamaat, but there are some worldly means that are required also, and it is these financial sacrifices. And also we see that Hazur wonderfully narrates incidents of people that give precedence in the way of God and what their life was like before and after. So it is not possible to love wealth as well as to love Allah. But fortunate is he who loves Allah. And if you are not ready to bear suffering and to acquire true piety, then how do you expect to succeed? Let's look at the companions, for example. Did they gain their station without doing anything? Or if we just look at how one has to work tirelessly in order to gain a worldly title, so then how can the title of "May Allah be pleased with him" be acquired with no difficulty? And even Hazrat Muslim Maud brilliantly explained that when you read about the previous companions of the Holy Prophet, just like you mentioned a short while ago, that you wish that you lived at their time and achieved similar feats. But Allah the Almighty has opened the door to the jihad of spreading the faith and the jihad against one's own self in this age, instead of the jihad of the sword. And we cannot spread faith without funds. So the mujahideen of this age are us. And through these consistent calls, we are not being forced, but being reminded that these are the obligations that you took upon yourself to help the religion of Islam. And we know that they are being spent in the right place. So who wouldn't want to, when the Khulafa have taught us, and countless people are witness to the fact that sincerely spending in the cause of Allah, not only Allah increases one in wealth abundantly, but you will also come closer to him.
Jazakallah for that, Samir. I think it's important to remember that if someone is calling us, someone is reminding us to fulfill our pledge, something which will take us closer to Allah, which will be a means of blessings for us in this life and the next, then there's nothing bad in that. It's actually a positive thing. It's in line with the Holy Quran, where Allah says that you should give reminders to the believers, because reminders help them. They help the believers. So if we are getting calls, of course it's a good thing. And Ahmadis attest to the fact, and they actually say, thank the person, the office bearer, making that call, reminding them, because they want to, of course, fulfill their pledges, but sometimes you don't have the means, or you just forget. So it's a positive element. But yeah, like Samad was alluding to, the office bearers, and Hazrat Khalifatul Masih always pays the attention of the office bearers towards their responsibilities, how they should be compassionate, merciful, understanding, all these kind of things. So office bearers, of course, have responsibility to be compassionate as well. Their way of approach should be according to the Holy Quran, saying what is good and nice, and of course reminding. Of course, after all, at the end of the day, their duty is to remind us of our pledges, which we fulfilled in terms of Chanda as well. And like someone has said, during COVID-19, during this pandemic, we have seen in reports by the Jamaats being sent to Jamaat newspapers, where the Jamaat is reaching out to Ahmadi Muslims, asking them if they have any issues, any problems, fulfilling their needs, whether it's prescriptions, whether it's the shopping to do. And so the Jamaat does take care of the needs of its members, and of course the needs of the wider community as well, whatever background they are from, whether Ahmadi Muslims or not. So now I'm just going to move on before we wrap the topic of Chanda up for today. We did a poll last week, and we asked you, does paying Chanda or charity play a role in making someone a better person? 97.5% said yes, and 2.5% said no, it does not. And we've also received a number of comments, a number of people expressing why they pay Chanda, or what benefit they see in Chanda. And I'll just read a few of those out. So one person wrote that as an Ahmadi, as a new converted Ahmadi, it shaped my life and made me a better person, just only by the grace and mercy of Allah. Another person wrote, financial sacrifice makes me feel good about the fact that I tried my best to obey and follow Allah's commands about giving and spending your money in the way of Allah. And just one more comment I read. Someone wrote, sacrifice is needed for any progress, but sacrificing one's wealth in order to gain Allah's nearness and pleasure is what we are taught by our religion. And of course, Ahmadi Muslims from across the world, they truly understand and enjoy the blessings of Chanda as well, and are actively participating in this jihad, the jihad of our time. Now we're going to move away from the topic of Chanda. Of course, if you have feedback, if you have any more questions, do send them to us. If there's, you think we haven't addressed the question in depth, or you think there's other elements to it, tell us, email us, tweet us, or send in your feedback via the WhatsApp number. Now I'm going to come to Mustafa now and move over to the second topic which we are discussing, and that's the organization of the Jamaat, or the structure of the Jamaat, the Nizam-e-Jama'at, and answering some questions which are around this topic. So Mustafa, the first point which we want to kind of discuss is it not enough for someone to just be an Ahmadi Muslim? Why do they have to be part of the Nizam-e-Jama'at, the organization of the Jamaat? Can't they just be separate from it and just profess their belief in Ahmadiyyat?
That's a good question, because we find mention in Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ talking about the time of the promised Messiah and Mahdi, peace be upon him, that when you see him, i.e. that Mahdi, pledge allegiance to him, even if it means crawling over snow, because he is the Khalifa of Allah, the Mahdi. So it's certainly a massively important thing to do, but it would be a mistake to consider that the end, because it's in fact just the beginning. Because in another hadith that we find in one of the 6 authentic books of hadith, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, stick to the community of the Muslims and their imam. Because when you stick to these people in that community, you benefit from the Quranic description of the community, the true community, where it says, indeed the Muslims, or indeed the believers, are believers. Innamal mu'minuna ikhwa. What that does is that allows other people who are with you to remind you, to guide you, to help you, to support you where you're falling short, or remind you where you can be better and get closer to Allah. So both in terms of your relationship with God, as in huququllah, the rights of God, people can tell you where you're falling short, how you can be a better person and get closer to Allah. And also in terms of the rights of the people, huququl ibad. The Ahmadiyya community together can achieve much more as a united force in terms of making a positive change and positive difference in the world than one individual on their own. It's because all structures work like this. Because all society and all organizations require some kind of structure. And what we have is the promised Messiah said, that my community is a community of people who actively go out and preach the message of Islam. And the Quran, God says in the Quran, that those among the believers who go out and strive in the way of Allah with their lives and their wealth are not equal to those who sit at home, except for those who might be injured or disabled. God has exalted in rank those who strive with their lives and their wealth over those who stay at home. Because generally in the world, the more you sacrifice for somebody, the more you do for somebody, the more you go out of your way to be there for somebody, the more they develop love for you. And the same applies to striving in the way of Allah. And that's why it's so important to go out and make that sacrifice and be a part of the community, rather than just professing your belief to a theological boundary at home.
Jazakallah for that, Mustafa. Just, spot on, especially that verse of the Holy Quran you mentioned, that believers who are active and who are going out and they're doing things for the propagation of Islam are not equal to those who sit at home, if they don't have any injury or are disabled. Another verse of the Holy Quran, and just before I mention this verse, just from a logical point of view and just an overview of the Muslim world today, the fact that the Jamaat has an organization, is united, has one direction, is going forward, spreading the message of Islam, helping the world in humanitarian efforts under the voice of one Khalifa, is something which the Muslim world craves for. This unity, this direction, this organization is what the Muslim world has been struggling for as well, especially in more recent times. So this is a huge blessing on the Jamaat that we are organized, we have a direction, we have a Nizam, and Ahmadi Muslims are part of it, and they are part of this jihad. Now, in another verse of the Holy Quran, Allah says, "Verily Allah loves those who fight in His cause, arrayed in solid ranks, as though they were a strong structure cemented with molten lead." This strong structure, cemented with molten lead, community, by the grace of Allah, is, can be seen within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community under the voice of one Khalifa, and the whole organization, all the different auxiliaries pushing towards one direction. Now I'm going to bring in Summer here. Summer, I was just talking about auxiliaries. Why are there so many auxiliaries within the Jamaat? And you have Khudam al-Ahmadiyya, you have Lajna-e-Maila. Why are there so many auxiliaries, and would it make someone less of an Ahmadi if they aren't part or they don't participate in those events or within that auxiliary?
Right. First of all, I think it is good if we mention that these auxiliaries are not some innovation, because if you take any organization or community, you will find that they will use certain terms and terminologies for particular roles and departments for the purpose of efficiency, discipline, and smooth running of their affairs. For example, let's look at a hospital, right? It is a place filled with doctors, nurses, and patients. Yet, if you look at it closely, you will come to find that just within the doctors, you will find doctors such as house doctors and surgeons, and the list goes on. And similarly, the Jamaat is not a separate entity from Islam. Such terms and terminologies you will find in early Islam as well. When a non-Arab came to Medina to become Muslim, yet despite of all this, he found that there were some Muslims known as the Muhajirin and some were known as the Ansar. And then he found that some were known as Ashra Mubashara and some were known as the Badri companions, where their mention has been an ongoing process in Hazuri Aqdas's recent sermons. And likewise, Hazrat Muslim Maud from the viewpoint of the moral training of the Jamaat, divided the ladies, men and children into various auxiliaries. And these organizations are religious organizations, and they're not involved in politics in any way. So this leaves us with the question, why should we be part of their events? So let's go back to the example of the army, right? There's different regiments within the army. For example, there are some at the front, then there is a medical corps, then there are some at the back thinking of strategies. And everyone has and plays a particular role, which not only improves one's experience, but leads to overall progression. So the objective and...
Jazakallah for that. We're just running out of time, so I just want to get the last question in very nicely summarized there. Jazakallah. I'm going to bring in Mustafa now. Mustafa, a question which is raised and which is asked is that within the organization of the Jamaat, the structure of the Jamaat, why is it important to be obedient to those Jamaat officials who sometimes are not being examples themselves? Is obedience of such people necessary?
Well, that's an interesting question, because with everybody being human, this question can come to one's mind. But it's important to remember that the premise of this question is that, well, we're told to do obedience, but some office bearers aren't perfect examples. Therefore, why do we have to do obedience? The thing is, the only single exemplar of perfection was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And though we have the guidance of the promised Messiah and the Khalifa, no one reached or can reach his level of perfection. So if we're looking for that perfection that came with the founder of Islam, that can't exist in anybody else. But despite that, the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in a hadith that whoever obeys Allah obeys me, and whoever disobeys Allah disobeys me, and whoever obeys one of the chiefs that he has appointed one of his companions as a leader in a country or an area obeys him, and one who disobeys that Amir, that leader, disobeys him. Now, obviously, these companions the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ sent to various areas and countries to represent him were of an extremely lofty spiritual and moral level. Yeah. But that doesn't mean they obviously couldn't have been on the level of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ still equated their obedience with his own and their disobedience with his own. And though he was a man with obviously no comparison to God, who is the supreme being of perfection, his disobedience, he still equated it with Allah's obedience, and vice versa with disobedience. Right. That's because that's how communal obedience works. That's how structures exist. In the world as well, if everybody was to start to decide whether to obey their boss and listen to what their boss has to say, based on whether they like their boss or whether they happen to agree with what their boss is saying, no structure can exist like that. But acknowledging the question, every human, including Ahmadis, can make mistakes. And with office bearers, those who have responsibility for the guidance of others, the bar of expectation is obviously higher. And when someone makes a mistake, or when there could be someone better doing a particular role, every Ahmadi has recourse to the Jamaat's process of making recommendations or complaints. And if necessary, every Ahmadi can exercise their right of recourse to Khalifatul Masih. And of course, Khalifatul Masih, being directly guided by God and the best role model of all the people living on the earth, is the most suitable and fit to make that decision.
Jazakallah for that, Mustafa. Again, very nicely put. Obedience is very, very necessary. It's a teaching of the Holy Quran, of course. We've received a number of questions. We don't have time to answer them today. Inshallah, we will be addressing those questions in future programs. One particular question which I want to read out is, someone has asked, why do non-Ahmadi Muslims always raise questions about Chanda? And this is a very interesting question indeed, and I think those people who are raising allegations against Chanda, they are more fit to answer that. Why are they raising these questions? It's often just red herrings, moving away from the actual arguments which the Jamaat talks about. And of course, Ahmadi Muslims, by the grace of Allah, understand and partake of the blessings from Chanda themselves. That's all we have time for today. Overall, the discussions we've had in last week's program and today, I think, is really evident clear that the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat has started no innovation with regard to Chanda. Chanda is actually in response to Quranic teachings and of course the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. If you only watched today's program about Chanda, we encourage you to watch last week's show as well. It's available on MTA Online 1's YouTube channel, where we answered important questions about Chanda as well. With regard to the Jamaat's organization and structure, well, that's a blessing the wider Muslim world craves for and struggles for. But Allah has granted this unity and direction only to the Jamaat of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, the greatest servant of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah. That's all we have time for today. Do send us your feedback and comments, and we'll love to hear from you. Until next week, Jazakallah for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
सदाकते इस्लाम कुछ भी हो, जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना पड़े हमें, जाएंगे हम जहाँ भी के जाना